Welcome to Meet the Podcasters, the show where I sit down and talk to successful podcast hosts about their craft. My guest today is Mollie McGlocklin, host of the Sleep is a Skill podcast. Sleep is a Skill is a company that optimizes people's sleep through a unique blend of technology, accountability, and behavior change. After having her own experience with insomnia while traveling internationally, Mollie created what she couldn't find, a place to go to learn the skill set of sleep. With a background in behavioral change from the non-wearable group, she became fascinated with chronobiology, which is essentially the study of the natural circadian rhythms which control our states of sleep and wakefulness. And if you've ever experienced jet lag, you'll know firsthand what it's like to have your normal circadian rhythm completely disrupted. On her podcast, Mollie focuses on chronobiology's practical application to sleep and our overall experience of life. She also runs a weekly Sleep Obsessions newsletter, which is packed full of all the latest research and developments in the field. And she's also now appeared as a guest on more than 140 podcasts to help build her brand and grow her own audience. I reached out to Mollie about coming on this show not only because I have an interest in the science of sleep myself, but also because I could tell the level of care and attention that went into each episode that she publishes. She speaks to some of the most respected researchers and entrepreneurs in this field. Her website is very well designed. Each episode is published with detailed show notes, and the content itself always delivers multiple actionable points listeners can take away and apply in their own lives. As you'll hear in this conversation, Mollie takes the craft of podcasting very seriously. From day one, she set a high bar on quality and has continually worked to refine and enhance her production processes. So if you're aiming to do the same, I think you'll find this conversation very useful. In this episode, we discuss why podcasters and entrepreneurs should prioritize sleep, Mollie's personal experience with insomnia, the origins of the Sleep is a Skill podcast, why Mollie decided to hire a dedicated podcast launch coach, the microphone Mollie uses to minimize ambient background noise, how to find interns and freelancers to help with production workflows, how to grow your own audience by being a guest on other podcasts, the main factors contributing to sleep deprivation in the Western world, wearable sleep trackers like Fitbits and Apple Watches, how to understand and avoid social jet lag, and lastly, the competing scientific theories as to why we dream during sleep. As always, you can find links to all the things we mentioned in this episode in the show notes on the Podcast.co website. The link is in the description if you'd like to go there and check those out. But now, let's get into the conversation. Today, I'm joined by Mollie McGlocklin, host of the Sleep is a Skill podcast. Thanks for coming on the show, Mollie.
Thanks so much for having me, James. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. There's a lot of sleep-related questions that I think we're going to get into later in the conversation that I'm looking forward to. But before we get into talking about your podcast, first, I wanted to address a topic which I think is sleep-related and it's also relevant to the listeners of this show. So many podcasters out there are extremely busy people, especially if they're running a podcast alongside their own business. They're trying to use that as a marketing strategy. And there is this kind of pervasive hustle culture among entrepreneurs. Gary V inspired, I think maybe. And the mentality is that you need to work harder and longer than everyone else to make your business and or podcast succeed. And if that means sacrificing sleep to squeeze in more work, then so be it. I'm not achieving anything when I'm sleeping, so that time would be better spent working. What is the problem with that mindset from your perspective?
Oh, yeah. Great question. So number one, I love Gary V and the ethos, and just I think one of the things I take away from it is the passion, the focus, the commitment. And I think there is a way to kind of have it all. And there is the possibility that you can both have all those, attributes. And what I would bring in is the importance of consistency. And certainly I feel like that applies in podcasting, in the realm of podcasting, but certainly as well in your ability to consistently show up day in, day out for your business and beyond. And certainly my story is one of a cautionary tale of doing the opposite, trying to do the grind, living in the middle of Manhattan, burning the candle at both ends. And I went through my own period of insomnia. And I can certainly tell you, while I was dealing with insomnia, I was not productive. I was not putting out quality anything. Kind of things just really stopped. So there is that end of the spectrum that doesn't really lead to, I think, the desired outcomes. And there is that possibility of blending those various ethoses.
Yeah, it's I think obviously in the extreme cases where you get to insomnia and you have serious consequences of the result of that. We can talk about your own backstory and how you developed a passion for sleep. But I think there's also this stage where it's like, the problems aren't that big, but you're in a state of chronic slight sleep deprivation, but you're unable to even tell that that's a problem because it's like you're a fish in water and you don't know, like, this is just how things are. So is that a common thing, like in the clients that you've worked with and helping people sleep? Are there people who have not really bad sleep deprivation, but this kind of low level that is having knock-on effects on everything then that they try and achieve and do in their work or creative capacity?
Oh, yeah. So number one, I think one of the things that's really interrupting that, I believe, is technology, because now we're starting to have more and more. Every client that we work with is at least wearing the Oura ring, spelled Oura, no financial affiliation, but one of the trackers that's kind of helping to break through this conversation of, sleep when I'm dead. Certainly that was part of my old ethos, so no shame in the game if that's where you're at the moment. But there's this whole other realm of gamification that's beginning to happen for people when they are tracking, whether it's with BioStrap, Whoop Band, Apple Watch, Dream Headband, Muse Headband. There's lots of different ways of getting in this, Garmin, etc. And all of these things will help shed light on what's possible to up-level your sleep. And for me, I work with a lot of different high performers and particularly a lot of poker players and, high-stakes poker players. And they can absolutely attest to the importance of really getting the sleep component dialed in. They're expected to have, perform cognitively at a high level for extended hours and hours, and certainly at odd hours of the day often. And so they can absolutely attest to some of the real financial hits that can come if you're not sufficiently sleeping in a consistent way. And that is something where I think that you begin to really see on the court what can happen when you aren't getting that sleep night after night, and just the financial hit that can happen.
And just similar to that, I was listening to your episode with Jeffrey Dermer, I think it is.
Yes.
He was the sleep coach to the US Olympic weightlifting team. I mean, the fact in itself that Olympic teams are now recruiting dedicated sleep coaches, speaks volumes in itself. And one of the points that he raised in that episode was like the average person, I think he said, gets 6.2 hours of sleep a night. And then the sleep that they do get is per quality sleep, which I think, attests to how important a podcast like yours is. And I'm confident that as this area of research continues to grow, I'm sure your podcast will grow along with it. Podcasts have changed the media landscape. There's a big appetite for health-related content out there. People want to do their own research and make their own decisions about what's right for them. So, have you noticed that people do want to take more ownership and take responsibility for their own sleep and their own health?
Absolutely. I mean, I think what's interesting is we're seeing just the cost. Often when we're willing to take action from a behavioral change perspective, it's when things aren't working and when, there's pain associated with what we're dealing with. And just even as a testament to the conversation, just last year, 2020, certainly during the midst of lockdown, insomnia was Googled more than it's ever been Googled in the history of keyword, search logging. And one of, I share that just from a perspective of what are we looking for? All these other keyword searching has gone up in the realm of sleep help, sleep tips, sleep remedies, sleep advice, all of these kind of inquiries. And I think now people are struggling, and there is more certainly uncertainty, or we're changing of the landscape of what jobs are looking like, more remote work. And while that might occur, like that has the opportunity to get more sleep, that lack of clear structure, which sleep really, really thrives on, of that consistency, is bringing bringing about some problems for people with their ability to manage this effectively.
So before we kind of, explore sleep a bit further later on in the conversation, I just kind of want to, talk a bit more about your podcast itself. So first of all, how would you sum up sleep as a skill for someone that hasn't heard of it before?
Yeah. So our intention with the Sleep is a Skill podcast is to provide practical takeaways for people in the area of up-leveling their sleep. So our intention is that we're releasing a podcast about once a week. We've been dabbling into 2 a week, so that's a newer thing. But certainly consistent stream of various things that people might not immediately connect are going to impact their sleep. So our aim is to go beyond lavender, so go beyond the sheets and the bedding and what have you, and really look at the various ways and really exciting ways that more and more people are beginning to speak to, even just this conversation of chronobiology, the science of time, really, and how that will can affect your biology as a facet of how we're managing our lives, really from the day or from the moment we're first waking up each morning, and what we're doing, how that gets mirrored in our sleep at night. So there's tons of different things, from whether it's sleep technologies that we're bringing in, sleep experts that are speaking to, years of research, or other sleep professionals, or, certainly health and wellness professionals that then have that focus on sleep.
Yeah. That's like one of the things that I was drawn to initially. One of the reasons I wanted to speak to you was because there is such an emphasis on the science and the research and data. Like you said, it's not just lavender and, these kind of cliches.
And not to knock lavender. Totally don't mean to knock lavender, but just, there's so much more. And I think it can be so empowering. And I, briefly alluded to the fact that this came from my own struggles with my sleep, and I felt so disempowered, and really scared. Is this my life? Like, am I going to have to take sleeping pills? What is this going to look like? And so to know that there are just so many things that you can not only just learn once, but can continue to bring mastery to. And there's an expectation that this is going to continue to improve as we work on various things in the management of our days and our life, that will result in improvements in our sleep objectively as well, with the data that we're bringing in.
Yeah. So could you kind of just, talk a bit more about your own journey there? You've kind of alluded to it before, and, how you got to this point where you thought, I really need to learn more about sleep and take control of this aspect of my life.
Yeah. I allude to it because it's, I think it provides context for, one, the passion behind this, because it grew out of just what felt like a complete lack of control in this area, and a lot of lack of hope in the area. And from that place, what that looked like was, living in the middle of Manhattan for many years, serial entrepreneur, burning the candle at both ends, had a lot of labels around my sleep. I'm a short sleeper, I'm a bad sleeper, I'm a night owl, it's in my genes, all of these things about, kind of coming from this perspective that it's fixed, there's nothing to do about it. What are you going to do? That's how it is. And then not really correlating as the years went on, and my habits are getting more and more kind of extreme or augmented. So what that's looking like is I'm going to bed later and later and later. I'm justified and righteous about it. I say, well, I make my own hours, so it's no big deal. Just wake up later. Who cares? And I'm not connecting as I start to have more and more symptoms that, so what that looks like is getting sick more often. I'm getting more anxious, stressed. Just my cognitive abilities, I feel like I'm just, not bringing my A game. I'm just getting run down. I got shingles in my, 20s, just things that probably shouldn't be happening. And then it wasn't, though, until I went through that period of insomnia, and this was traveling internationally. My fiance and I decided, okay, let's be like the modern, Tim Ferriss, and put all of our stuff in storage. We're going to go be digital nomads, travel the world. But our businesses were not in that place. We were just so stressed to the max and had employees, and just systems were not in place to really have that all work. And so then the symptom was just I can't sleep. Just, the stress finally hit that tipping point. So on the flip side of it, then what ended up happening was really a commitment from a place of desperation. I got to get this figured out, because at my lowest point, I was in Croatia, went to the doctors and with Google Translate and say, I can't sleep. What do I do? Help. And I leave with, their version of Ambien. And it was like, that felt like, all right, I got to get at the source of this. And so ensued this whole quest. And on the other side of it now, we've really built this community and we're in luxury hotels now. We work with a lot of high performers. I mentioned poker players, UFC, high performing entrepreneurs. And so a whole new world came out of it. But mainly what I want to say is that it's that place of skill set that I think many of us might not realize, and I certainly didn't, that this really can be a skill and really is something that you can develop no matter where you're at.
Yeah, so that kind of journey that we went on, was there a particular moment where you kind of decided, this is information that needs to get out there and this would make a good podcast? What was the origin of the podcast itself and making that decision to start publishing content?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think the want for this was when we actually we'd bought a one-way ticket and we're gonna do this. This is happening, and my sleep was just so at this rock bottom point. The workability of this wasn't working, so we bought a one-way ticket back to New York to really just figure out this sleep debacle. And while we get back, I'm starting to reach out to all kinds of experts, and I'm looking for literally like a sleep support group. Like, where can I go to, just discuss and like not feel ashamed or embarrassed or all those different things, and just to know of other people that are dealing with what I'm dealing with. And there was nothing like that. And so that, I think, put in the beginning of that conversation. I began working organically with people that were struggling with their sleep, just, to kind of because of that place of empathy that I had been struggling so much. So working with them. And then what ended up happening was I began interviewing so many people, and I was recording the interviews. And so then it made the logical next step to create the podcast to really share all this information.
So those early recordings, were they like unreleased recordings that you were recording for your own benefit, being like, this is stuff that I want to have access to in the future? And then is that how the podcast came about? Yeah.
Actually, really good question. So the original place that all began was, so we have plans of releasing a book down the road. And so this has been kind of a background project. And one of the recommendations for writing these books and when you're having these interviews is to record them using otter.ai so that you can have the transcript going so you can refer back, for your notes for your book. And so I was doing that, and I already kind of got in the habit of like having that kind of official setup for that. And so, yes, there are actually a lot of those that then are not released, that, maybe we can do something with those in the future. But, it then kind of created the container for, all right, we already got these different interviews that are kind of on the calendar, got the business going, got the weekly newsletters. Why not add in this podcast component? And so then it kind of was birthed through there. So we actually arranged for it to be on World Sleep Day on March 13th, 2020, which was, of course, right in alignment, right in the middle of the U.S. beginning to lock down. So, which is certainly affecting people's sleep. So it was an interesting time, to say the least.
Yeah, I can imagine. So the kind of journey was that you had, started taking on clients and helping them with their sleep. You started the newsletter, and then after that, the podcast was the kind of the additional piece added on top of that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, we'd had Sleep as a Skill had been fully functioning for a few years before this. And so we had, one-on-one clients in small group. And then the newsletter had been being released. And then the podcast felt like this kind of next step, natural evolution for sure, for a place to provide more information that's, free for people that they can, begin taking action on immediately is really our goal. And then for myself, I'm pretty obsessive in this area of sleep. And so it's kind of a dream come true, being able to have these conversations with people routinely on my calendar. I personally love it. So it all feels like a win-win from that perspective.
Nice. And one of the things I think when a lot of people start a podcast, we've had this kind of discussion on this show before. A lot of times people struggle to maintain it. Like they'll publish 3 episodes or they'll publish 10 episodes, and so a very small percentage of people get past episode 10. And part of this all comes down to behavior change, and changing your behavior is hard, and adapting a new habit is hard. This is something that you're an expert in behavior change as it relates to sleep and other areas of life. So I was wondering if there are any, tips or skills, practices that people can adopt if they're trying to make podcasting a habit that you think would be helpful if they want to be consistent with it.
Yes. Okay. So this is one of my favorite topics. One, if we go back to what we discussed with Gary Vee and how to kind of meld or, merge these various ways of thinking around, work-life balance and what have you, but also to bring that hustle and intensity and passion. So I mentioned consistency, and that consistency seems to be one of the things that has, certainly in the realm of podcasting, we found that in the newsletter, but just I feel like there's something there that can be so powerful. So having those clear deadlines for yourself that they've been also put out into the world of what those are. So then there's an expectation that you have to actually live up to. But I think from a behavioral change perspective, that really goes back to our relationship with our word. And so for us to really begin to take a bit of an audit of what's our relationship to our word. And many of us might have a bit of a word bankruptcy. I mean, I've certainly had that at certain points in my life where it will ebb and flow. And there's times, I'm on it. I'm doing all the things I said. And then next week it's like, So one, maybe dropping some of the weight of that and really just getting honest and real and authentic about the fact that are you someone that, can't seem to make it to whatever appointment you have, or you're going to be running late, or this is going to be happening, or that's going to be happening? Are those things that are in the space? And if so, that can impede your ability to, know yourself as your word over time. So a couple of practices that have been interesting for me, the longest running thing that I've ever done in my life of kind of daily consistency is a gratitude email that I send to friends and family. So I'm at 2,416 or something days in a row on that one. And part of that has just been literally because it's numbered. I really recommend numbering things. And because suddenly you're playing a game. And when you're playing a game, it's like, oh, well, you don't want to break the streak. So you number these things, and then you also have that kind of social pressure. We're such social creatures and part of a tribe, and we don't want to, say we're going to do something and then just, fall apart at it. So bringing that numbering into the space, the same thing happened for me with the newsletter. We're at, I think, like 167 or something along those lines. So having that has really gamified it, and the same with the podcast. So the more you can share what the expectations are with listeners or viewers, or what capacity, what platform you're on, it can really help build that trust for them and for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I think accountability is such a big thing. Like, if you have this idea for a podcast and you don't tell anyone about it and you're the only one that knows about it, it's very easy to, just go back on your word or say, oh, I'll push that back to tomorrow. But if you announce it in some way, or you let other people in your life know that this is the thing that I want to do, sometimes some people might tell people and then still not go ahead and do it.
Yes.
But it certainly helps to have some element of accountability, so you're not the only person that knows what you're trying to achieve, basically. Yeah.
Especially if it's a stretch goal too. So I had hired a podcast launch coach when I first was launching, just to work through, as like a 3-month sort of thing, just to work through those kind of unknowns of, what platform am I going to be on? How do I go through the process of setting all this up? Those kind of unknowns can feel a little bit bigger than they might actually be when you really get into practice with it. And to have someone kind of along the way as a bit of a Sherpa can be helpful, I think, in those periods where it does feel like it's a bit more out of your comfort zone. So having that, and then once you're clear, because once I got the podcast set up and had my whole, my mic, my this, my that, and then I had the platform. Then really it was just a matter of setting up systems so that I could kind of just show up and have it all kind of work.
Oh, nice. So the podcast launch coach help you get all those nuts and bolts, technical elements down. So like the equipment that you're using right now, I imagine, and how you distribute the podcast. Is that right?
Good question. So I will say that my fiance and I had some trial runs with the mic situation because after we did get the sleep problem figured out, we did end up for the next 3 years traveling internationally. And so with that, we did have to have a lot of trial and error with good mics. He has a company in I mentioned the poker arena. So he's a professional poker player and helps other poker players spot tells at the table, along with behavioral tells and kind of presentation coaching, what have you. So we do a lot of filming. And so we did kind of trial and error this mic, which is great no matter where you might be. It just does not seem to pick up external noise for the most part. So in random Airbnbs and dogs or whatever, they don't get picked up. So I will say we did have a pretty good setup before that. But what he really helped me with was a couple of the structures. So when I first was doing this before I started working with him, I had mentioned I had some of those interviews and people would send me over lots of emails. Oh, shoot, here's my bio. Oh, here's my headshot. Here's this, whatever. So started getting much better systems with Calendly, with setup prompting, with Airtable. So now I have a whole rundown of in very small sort of little lines with everyone's information, their headshots, they can sound like a small thing, like, oh, well, that's not a big deal. But it actually is just having that sense of I can see where everything is kind of at and what's forecasted. Really, some of those elements have really helped make a big difference in just having this go with velocity. And also it helped me with kind of sharing about it beforehand and when it was launched and then after the fact and kind of getting that information out there and hopefully excitement around the release of it.
Yeah, I think people do tend to underestimate how many different moving parts there are. And like you said, these things that seem inconsequential in isolation, when you're trying to produce a podcast alongside running a business, like these are the things that you don't want to be worrying about and you don't want to be fussing over. Just before we move on, just for the people that listen to this show, we haven't mentioned the name of the mic that you're using and you sold it. So it a Rode mic?
It is a Rode. You knew. Yes, exactly. It's so we got the Rode, the Pro, the Focusrite, and the Cloud Lifter. So those are our real three things that for us have been really, really solid.
Nice. We won't get into any more nerdy detail other than that, but just now that you've sold the mic, everyone can go check out Rode mics. We've discussed them before on this show.
I mean, we would be in like Thailand, Bali. We would be in like loud environments, Bangkok, what have you, and nothing seemingly would come out on the recordings with this versus we tried other ones and it had a very different result.
Yeah, well, shout out Rode. Good
products.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Meet the Podcasters is brought to you by Matchmaker.fm, the largest online platform connecting podcasters with great guests. Whether you're looking for a qualified expert to feature in your next episode, or you'd like to get booked as a guest yourself, you can sign up today for free. Simply create your profile and get instant access to a growing database of more than 40,000 hosts, producers, and subject matter experts from around the world. You can filter profiles by category, location, and language spoken to quickly pinpoint the right guests and shows. And if you need help promoting your own episodes, you can find lists of other podcasters open to ad swaps and cross promotions. Join the community, record better content, and reach a wider audience. Try it out today by heading to matchmaker.fm or clicking the link in the description. And now, let's get back to the episode.
So for you, obviously, you're now more than 50 episodes in. You kind of got over those initial stumbling blocks. You had your podcast launch coach and you've got all your systems in place. What has been the most challenging aspect of producing this show? these days, because it's not easy and it does take a lot of work.
Yeah. So a couple of things that we've evolved to through a lot of trial and error for sure, and a lot of moments of, oh shoot, I forgot to do the thing with the other thing. There's, to your point, the moving parts, there's a lot of them. So a couple of things that have been useful for us to also keep it as workable and streamlined as possible. So what we do is we hired someone to kind of clean up the audio on Upwork. We love Upwork, hire a lot of people on there. And so outsource that. So we found a really good person that now has been with us for quite some time. So we've got a good system there. So we send that over. They then drop it into Dropbox, the completed versions. And now that we have different sponsors and things, that they know what to add in and when, so we don't have to worry about any of that. Then the other thing that we did was we actually brought in a series of interns that had been really helpful. So we use both Acadium, and for female founders, they can use something called Flick, F-L-I-K. It's a female-founded company with female interns, really affordable option. So you can have 3 interns at one time. And so we would just kind of have people coming through. But what we did, so that we didn't have to worry about too much of the training element of things, we made on Loom a folder that they have to watch before doing their first episode. So they go through, and it's kind of like, all the ins and outs of multiple videos that kind of go into the creation of the show notes. We do love grain.co if anyone's using Zoom. So grain.co is really great because it will do the transcription, but also the video. It makes it really easy to pull little, segments there. And then how to create those into kind of the Gary Vee style with, the little transcripts underneath them, and kind of pulling out those clips, making those show notes consistent, and then putting them into the social media platforms. So we have a kind of social planner that they put those into. So that's where we're at right now. We are newly bringing on someone full-time for those components to kind of up-level from the intern side of things. And then we do have an assistant that kind of helps further manage those kind of moving parts. But I think what's really where I'm at is figuring out how to find some a bit more of there still is that bottleneck for me of the voice, like writing out some of what's there, certainly social media platforms and that sort of thing. So one, we're looking to see, can we, certainly train a bit more for that. So I think that's our next evolution.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that I was impressed with on your website is the depth of your show notes and the detail in your show notes. So are these all being provided by these interns, and this is outsourced work that you've provided training for people? And then, well, I assumed that you were doing this yourself, because I was like, whoa, there's so much detail in here.
Yes. Oh, good. That makes me so happy. So it began with that. It began with kind of going through and creating the original show notes. When we first were doing this, before we found our current audio person, we had someone from the Philippines that had also been providing like 10 bullet elements from the show notes as well, was part of her sort of little package there. And that was great because, one of the things we began was she would do some of that and then I would beef it up. And so what evolved then was, once we started bringing in more of the interns, that we have them come up with around like 15 or so bullet points for every single podcast of the top sort of show notes. We're not at the fancy level of like, and it's at, 15 minutes in or any of that stuff yet. But we are at the place where there are those bullet points, and then we have them kind of sum up what the main takeaways are. And then where I'm at right now is they do that, and it's kind of the structure, the architecture of that is there. And then I usually go in and add a bit of the top, why it's important to them, why they should really care about this episode part in the top.
Yeah. No, it sounds like you've done a lot of trial and error, and you've settled on something that clearly works for you. I'm just really impressed to know that it's a big collaborative effort to get these show notes together.
Thanks. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Because there would be multiple. There's times when it was stressful because I would have so many podcasts recorded and in the vault, and I still have some in the vault that got to get released. And they're sitting there, and then there's this knowing of okay, but once they're done, there's still a lot of things that need to happen to them. So then we started to now finally. I'm grateful that now. Right after we record, then there's things that happen. So then they go sent off to the audio guy. Now this intern's working on this other intern's working on that. And it seems to kind of all come together.
Yeah. Well, there's one question that I usually ask most of my guests because I'm always interested to know myself because I record interviews and it's not work that you can really outsource. So if you're interviewing someone, what does your typical preparation process look like?
Yes. Okay. So one of the things that was really interesting is, so now I've guested on different podcasts over the past, pretty much the last 2 years. And so I don't know what we're at, like 100 and something, 40 podcast guesting or something like that. And so I got to see a lot of what other podcast hosts will bring in for their flows. And I have to say, mine does not look like a lot of theirs. So some people, and I shouldn't say a lot of theirs because it really depends, but some people will have really in-depth things that are very, very impressive on what they're going to be covering and what this will look like. And what we have is in the Calendly link, we have a link to kind of the basic structure that people can expect with most of our podcasts and what those look like. The time allotment, we always start with kind of the introduction element of the why that they're passionate about this topic to get kind of the drive or the mission behind why they're doing the thing they're doing. Then we go into kind of the ABCs for anyone that's not familiar, because sometimes we'll be talking about, these biometrics or, acronyms and different things. So we start with the ABC component for people that aren't familiar, but then go, deeper for those that are familiar, the kind of biohackers amongst the listeners. And then so we have an organic conversation from there. And if they want to call out anything they're not interested in discussing or that they would like to focus on, we have them share that. And then about the past, I would say pretty much from the beginning of this year, we did add on a new thing that we always ask 3 personal questions at the very end because it's about their sleep. So the thinking is if these people have some expertise in the area of sleep, like what are they doing? People want to know how are they managing things? So then we ask 3 questions at the end. What's your nightly sleep routine look like? What's on your nightstand? And what's kind of made the biggest change to your sleep game, biggest sleep aha moment? And then at the very end, sharing how we can follow them, how the best ways to, kind of stay connected from there on out.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, like you said, a lot of people do just want to hear, well, what are the experts doing and what can I do that will simplify my life if I can just follow the approaches that they've adopted as nice, actionable takeaways that people can replicate.
I know I've already mentioned Tim Ferriss once, so not to be redundant, but I know one of the books that he's made quite popular is this Daily Rituals book. And I think that there's an opportunity to kind of be logging the nightly rituals of different individuals and what we can learn from them. But I will also say nightly and also management throughout the day really does go together to see how that sleep kind of comes together. And then lastly, if there are some really kind of yes, there might be a technical component or really high profile guest or what have you. Sometimes we will have those interns kind of just drum up very casual, like 10, 15 questions from their different sites or articles about them to just further have some things to fall back on that we want to bring specifics in. But largely it is very much an organic conversation is what we're trying to create.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. One of the points you touched on in your answer, I just want to, this will be the last question before we move on, just to talk briefly about sleep. You said you've done a big push on going out of your way to guest on different podcasts. I think you said you've done more than 150 guest appearances, which in itself, like alongside producing your own podcast, being a guest on lots of podcasts is a job in itself.
Yes.
We've interviewed quite a few podcasters on this show, and you were, not that no one has ever sent a media kit before, but the material that you sent over was extremely helpful. You had your bio, headshot, links, FAQs, like all this stuff was just so well presented, and it's obviously like it was worth you investing the time putting this together, given that you're doing such a big push on being a guest on different podcasts. So I was just wondering, first of all, other podcasts out there or other podcasters out there, why should they do this kind of push and book interviews on other shows? And is there any advice that you would give them if they want to do a campaign where they're appearing as a guest on other shows?
Yes, definitely. So one, I'd had a few friends that had done some like high-level mastermind groups and had gotten a lot of kind of advice and training. So they'd been kind enough to share some of the things that they had learned. And one of the main takeaways was like, okay, if you want to build your podcast, it's guesting and partnership and kind of mutual sharing of different audiences. So I went into the realm of doing this. I will say, to your point, it is definitely a bit of a second job. I have significantly dropped the number of podcasts that I am going on at this point, just from a balance perspective. But I am really grateful for it because it really did help me learn a ton. Just, one, getting ideas from other podcasters and seeing how they set things up. Some people go straight into it. You don't even know, oh, we're recording right now. I don't even know. And then other people, have this kind of really clear thing that they set you up powerfully. You debrief at the end, all of these different things. Seeing different flows on the back end. Some people are having you sign contracts. Some people are, just very, very casual. So it's everything on the spectrum. But I also share that my podcast launch coach had made the argument that you really want to always have a give at the end or throughout or however it works in that podcast that has people take action from listening to you so that it's not just kind of a lost listen. Instead, that they're somehow going to be connected with you ongoingly. So whether that's, like a free downloadable PDF or, they get something when they sign up or whatever it is, mentioning that so that you can kind of continue that conversation. So that's been a big one.
Yeah, making sure that the interviews that you do are time well spent. Like,
yes,
there's something in this for me. I'm delivering value on this podcast, and yeah, if you have a PDF or something that you can direct people to your website to check out, whatever that is. Every business is different, so what that looks like for your business will obviously depend on who your customers are. But yeah, it's really key, and most podcasters will give you the opportunity to plug whatever you have at the end of the interview, sometimes at the start of the interview. But yeah, that's a really good point to make.
Yeah. And I'll also just share too, if you are a podcast, I know people start podcasts for various reasons, but for the entrepreneurship group, the ones that we assume that there could be some benefit to your business out of sharing your message, then certainly the guesting, there's still definitely kind of revenue streams for me that have come from different guesting. Actually, one of the first podcasts that I ever did still seems to be one of the most lasting ones where I still get clients coming in from that one podcast. Now, I have also learned that there's a lot of podcasts I did that probably had like 2 listeners. But it did help me really fine tune some of my talking points and help clear up some of the major things that I wanted to get across in a shorter period of time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And it's for any podcasters out there, it's definitely worth considering, if you haven't done it already, getting that practice in. And even like you said, just to see what other people are doing in itself can be so helpful in terms of generating ideas for your own show.
Absolutely.
So let's park the podcasting conversation there. And I just want to run through some questions on sleep. We'll just see how many we get through and see where we get to. So first of all, we've touched on it before at the beginning of the interview. You mentioned technology and how that's affecting people's sleep. But what are, in your opinion, the main factors contributing to the fact that sleep deprivation is at an all-time high in the developed world?
Yeah. So I would say that interestingly, it comes from a stat out of the World Health Organization. In 2016, they reported that the average person is spending around 90% of their days inside. And this was, 2016, before a lockdown, before a lot of these other reasons why we might be now even more indoors. And the reason that is important is that we're much more akin to zoo animals at this point than our kind of evolutionary, from a ancestral perspective. We are very devoid of some of these rhythms of nature. And now that might sound like soft, like, who cares about that? But when we think of circadian rhythms and the strength of our circadian rhythm, that's this conversation of this 24-hour rhythm that as human beings, we are on every single day. We're diurnal creatures, meaning that we're meant to be active during the day and at rest at night. So with suddenly a missing of some of those cues that we've had for, thousands of years and have really run the show as far as keeping us on track, there's something known as our suprachiasmatic nucleus in our brain. That's our master clock that really keeps our, all the functioning of our body on track, from everything down to hormones to that sleep-wake cycle. And that master clock communicates with our peripheral clocks in virtually every cell of our body. So further keeping this time domain in check. So when we don't have these cues, some of the key cues now, it's known as Zeitgebers, which just means time givers that tell the body what to do and when, because basically the body is always seeking out information around what time it is and what jobs does it need to be performing. And we're grateful for that. If you travel across the globe and you want to shift time zones, it would kind of stink if we always had to stay, directly on whatever, UK time versus Bangkok time versus whatever, right? Yeah. So we want to be able to have that flexibility, and that's amazing. But at the same time, that can pose its own problems when we are giving ourselves mixed cues. So what are the cues? The number one is light timing. That's the most impactful of all the time givers. And part of the reason for that is that our eyes are directly connected to that suprachiasmatic nucleus, that master clock that we mentioned. And so our eyes are actually, while we don't think of it necessarily, they are a part of an exposed part of our brain. And so when those eyes are exposed to light, that brings about a resetting of our master clock every single day. So if you are getting sporadic, or maybe sometimes maybe not going outside at all, but certainly sporadic timing of the exposure of that bright light, that is doing some real damage on keeping that clock in check and saying, okay, this is the start of the day, and then I'm going to release all these start of the day type hormones. So what we want to help create is this cortisol pulse in the first part of the morning, and then on the evening, shift to a very different lineup. So on the flip side of that light is darkness. So we want to have much, much more darkness than the average person has, and we want it to be aligned with those rhythms. And then there are more in alignment with that further kind of keep us on time. But that divorcing of nature, of connection to nature, seems to have brought about a lot of problems biologically.
Yeah. I've heard the point about light and sleep before. I don't know if you've heard the Huberman Lab podcast.
Yes, fantastic. Yeah.
It's a really good podcast. And Andrew Huberman is repeatedly hammering home this point in a lot of his episodes, where you need to wake up early in the morning. And there's something about the angle of the sun when it's at that point in the morning, that if you view light at that time of day, your body is able to register that that's the case.
Yes. I mean, I've got my little red light over here. It's infrared light, and that's what's the type of light that's present in the early morning hours based on the stretching of the sun over the surface, the horizon. And that's giving us that full spectrum light that is both has blue light present, which, I know gets vilified a lot, but in the daytime, incredibly important. But when paired with infrared light and that full spectrum light, and so, you can pay good money to sit in front of an infrared light if you have psoriasis or eczema or what have you from a doctor and getting a prescription for it. But you can also have exposure to it by just getting outside in those early morning hours. And then it's also present in sunset as well.
Yeah. We can't work out what the situation was with this light. There's a lot of plugs plugged in. It's gone off. So we're just going to continue. So viewers, please excuse the fact that the lighting has now changed. It's coming into nighttime here in the UK. Yeah. Exactly. See? So we'll roll with it. We'll go with it.
I love it. See, now you're actually leaning into that circadian lens to your day. Yes. So
this was all planned. Yes. Ben had the lights on a timer to go off just at the right moment. So one of the things you touched on in the answer was jet lag, and you were saying, we do have this ability to adapt.
Yes.
One of the things that I think affects a lot of people is social jet lag. So what is social jet lag, and how can people avoid it?
Yeah, social jet lag, we're all familiar with, conventional jet lag. Social jet lag is when you are routinely kind of have a fairly consistent scheduling, or you have a particular schedule, and then you really deviate from that, presumably for social functions or reasons. Now, I do think there's an opportunity to even rebrand it further to kind of just self-create a jet lag, because we also saw during the lockdown, people often exhibiting some of these behaviors, and they might not be seeing anyone. And instead, it's just sort of, oh, well, I went down the rabbit hole on my phone or watching Netflix or whatever. So whatever you do to get there, what the thinking is that you're really creating that same experience of jet lag. And if you've experienced jet lag, you really know how confusing and weird it can feel. But you've done that without actually getting onto a plane and going anywhere. So you have now multiple days that you're going to be adjusting your body back, presumably to your more standard rhythm. And I think many of us don't correlate all of the ill effects that can come from that as being linked to that, one crazy night or couple of nights.
Yeah. No, I think it's so common that, sleep just goes out the window, and the regularity that you've established Monday to Friday just goes out the window. It's really difficult to bounce back from. One more thing, a lot of people are using wearables like Fitbit, Apple Watch, Whoop, straps to track their sleep. How reliable are they, and what should people keep in mind when they're reviewing the data that they receive from those wearables? Yeah,
really good question. Because if we're not informed, sometimes it can do some harm if we don't know what we're looking at and what's important to look at. So one, I would say that as of right now in 2021, the current hand and wrist-based trackers really pretty unreliable with the sleep staging, in particular, sleep stage classification. So you'll see a lot of, and you see different doctors, kind of wellness experts saying, oh, look, I got this much deep sleep, this much REM, et cetera, et cetera. And most of them seem to really be a bit of a coin toss as their comparison to kind of our gold standard PSG. So do know that if you're stressing yourself out a lot with those sleep staging, you get another tracker and you might have a whole other set of kind of breakdowns of ratios of what you're getting. So don't, pun intended, lose too much sleep over that. But the other ones that are really tend to be a bit more helpful, many of them tend to be fairly good at just the knowing of, are you asleep or are you awake? So just that binary element, which can tell us quite a bit. It can help us to understand what time you're going to sleep, what time you're waking up, and then those wake ups that many people complain of, and seeing how long those are lasting. But then what I really work with a lot of people on, so that part too, but also some of the biometrics. So we do a lot with heart rate variability, HRV, because that is really a fantastic metric of recovery. How recovered is your body out of the course of the day from that nocturnal HRV readouts. So we look at those. We look at heart rate and kind of the arc of that heart rate throughout the course of the night. Respiratory rate, we can learn a lot about how people are breathing through that one. And then body temperature can be really helpful, particularly for women of menstruating age. There's different cycles that they're going through at different periods that can help us inform how their sleep is going to be affected there. And then also some of the trackers are adding on blood oxygen levels readouts as well. So you can also learn some things there too.
Nice. And beyond trackers, are there any gadgets or tech that you use or you think are worth investing in and you'd recommend to other people if they're looking to improve their sleep?
Yeah. So right now, I'd say two of the other pieces of tech that we do end up often having people wear. One, interestingly enough, continuous glucose monitors, which people might have seen a bit more in the news for, outside of what we might have thought for, these are just for diabetics or people that are concerned about their trajectory there. This now is coming into some very fit individuals or active or health conscious people, and wearing those, and it can be really, really surprising how a number of us can have lots of variability and spiking and crashing. And the reason we look at that with sleep is that if you are having some of that variability throughout the course of your night with your glucose and insulin, then you can experience wake-ups. And they can be the type of wake-ups that you might now really be up, because when we do have those crash, the glucose elements come really crashing, then often we have a result in adrenaline and cortisol. And once you have that surging, it's kind of more challenging to fall back asleep. So that is one. And then the second one is called the LIEF, LIEF. And that right now is one of the few really continuous HRV trackers throughout the daytime. So most of them will do nighttime or just sporadic, like the Apple Watch just randomly will check your HRV at odd times. But if you do something like the LIEF, you can they kind of color code what your stress levels are. So we see both heart rate and HRV. And so we'll see, are you trending more towards like the red and the orange kind of sympathetic response stress kind of period of your day. And then it literally buzzes you when you are going to that state so that you actually take a new action. So when you get buzzed, you shift your breathing, because what's really interesting is that you can train yourself to be able to modulate going from a stress state to a parasympathetic state purely by virtue of shifting your breath. So that one can be really, really helpful to help train you to notice, oh, I'm going to that shallow, stressed out state, like chill, take a breath, and not to belittle, because of course in those moments it feels justified and it feels like there's a threat or a problem. So when we can start to train for that, then that can really be empowering.
Yeah. I think the breath is such a powerful tool in affecting our physiology, calming ourselves down or amping ourselves up, depending on what you do with the breath. You can do a lot there. This is my last question. I don't think there's a clear answer to this question. I don't think researchers have worked out, but since I have you on the podcast and since you've spoken to so many experts in this area, why do we dream? Like, what is going on with dreams? What are the theories behind, what is the purpose? It seems like it's hard to understand why evolution has given us dreams. So I'd just be interested to hear, if there are any interesting theories you've heard out there as to the purpose or explanation behind dreams.
Yeah, good question. Actually, we're going to be doing a whole series going a bit deeper on dreams in particular, going into the new year. So we'll have even some more insights on that topic soon. But as of right now, to your point, there are a lot of questions as to kind of the why. But the theories, some of the theories are that it's really helping us to kind of work out things that have happened throughout the course of our day, or things that are on our mind, and then helping to organize what makes sense to kind of hold on to and kind of commit to memory, and then what makes sense to kind of let go of. And so this kind of organization, but it seems to be really, when we talk about dreams from the REM state, there can be almost a dreaming component that happens in other stages, which is interesting too. So even sometimes those night terrors can be occurring in, non-REM stages, which is often surprising for people. But with that, we can understand that with dreams, we seem to almost think of it, or when we think of REM, we think of it almost as an inner therapist period of your night. So if you are dealing with, and that can often be the cruel joke, that if you are really stressed and things are really gnawing at you, sometimes those early morning wake-ups tend to be what happens. And then unfortunately, that tends to be when you are transitioning into a more higher ratio of REM. So when we're cutting into that can make it just the snowball effect of now you didn't have that sort of inner therapist session that kind of happens when you're going through that REM to work things out, to kind of play with some of these different possibilities and kind of stretch the imagination. But there's, that suspending of muscle movement during the REM state. And so we're almost able to seemingly safely act out different things that we might not be able to do, in the daytime. So when that is devoid, that can be really problematic those are the times when we might just, kind of be short fused, or we're not able to handle the same stressors in the way that we might if we were properly getting that sleep that we require. So it is a really important time to cultivate. And also that goes into, for when people say the hustle and grind and, the Gary Vee style things, and what they tend to do is they wake up earlier. So they're like lobbing off that early morning hours. That's when you're cutting off that REM time, that internal therapist time. So that can be really problematic in the long run. And the flip side is important too. If then you say, well, that's not me. What I do is I just cut into my evening and keep going, pushing my bedtime out. Well, that's cutting into your deep sleep opportunity time, because the body does try to keep us somewhat on time with those sleep scheduling. So there's really no free lunch when you cut either one of those sides off.
Yeah, it is so interesting. Like the body is always trying to achieve this homeostasis, and
Yes.
yeah, you can't be clever and get around the body's mechanism. You can for a short time, but it'll always come around.
Yes.
And
Believe
bite
me,
you
I've tried
eventually.
every way. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
So, we could talk for ages about sleep, but I'm mindful of your time now, Molly, and I think we have covered a lot of ground here about podcasting, some ground about sleep, but I'm just going to leave it there. But before we wrap up, where can people go to connect with you and find out more about the different things you're involved in?
Yeah. So where they can go is to sleepisaskill.com. And that's, really my most important message, that I think that sleep really is a skill in our modern society, based on the fact that we're living so outside of these realms of nature and some of these things. I know we alluded to some of the top-down things, but there's so many elements based on the timing of your meal schedule, the timing of your exercise, the timing of your thoughts, the type of environment that you're in, your air quality. So many things go into this conversation around sleep. So it really is, there is this opportunity to approach it as a skill set. So no matter what you think you know about sleep, or you think, oh, my sleep's fine, I would challenge you to, one, start getting some of these trackers and see what comes back, and two, entertain the possibility that there is something for all of us to up level. I'm continually just fascinated in learning various things that I can further do and that clients can do. So you can go to sleepisaskill.com. There there's lots of different things you can do. So one, we have a sleep assessment there that will give you targeted feedback based on what you're struggling with your sleep. We do have a downloadable PDF called The Optimized Bedroom, 18 strategic tips, high-tech, low-tech ways to improve your bedroom space. We also have that weekly newsletter that you can sign up. Our aim is for it to be the most obsessive sleep newsletter on the planet. So definitely, please get on there. And please,
it's good newsletter,
yes,
good content.
Right,
yes.
Good. Yeah. I'm so happy about that. And please, we're very eager for more feedback. So if you ever see anything cool that other people are doing that you think could be interesting on the sleep, or, feedback that you like this, you don't like that, please let us know. We really take that into consideration. And then we also have the weekly podcast that you can subscribe to, so you can get free, weekly information to help up level your sleep. And then finally, if you are really struggling with your sleep and you're looking for support, we do require that everyone we work with wear an Oura Ring as of right now. We might be adding on the Whoop component and BioStrap, so kind of playing with those in the future, but kind of bringing in that tracking and gamification to help people really go on a kind of journey with their sleep in 90-day packages.
Yeah. Fascinating, really interesting. And it was a pleasure chatting with you, Molly. I've learned a lot of useful stuff I'll take away from this interview. So thanks again.
Good.
Really
I'm
appreciate
so
it.
happy. Well, I appreciate all the work you're doing. This is so cool, because I think podcasting has just been such a gift for me personally, and I've met so many amazing people in the process. So if anyone is even remotely considering starting their podcast or up-leveling their podcast, I think that this is such a great platform that you've created to help demystify it.
Thank you, Molly. I appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's it for this episode. Thank you for taking the time to tune in. If you enjoyed the conversation or find it useful, please do hit the like and subscribe buttons. Look, it only takes a couple of seconds for you to do, but it really does make a huge difference to myself and to Ben, who's done a great job behind the scenes on all the recording, editing, and post-production work on this series. If there are any podcasters you'd like to see in the next season, or topics you'd like us to cover in the future, the best place to leave us that feedback is in the YouTube comments section. Alternatively, you can leave the show a rating and review on Apple Podcasts if you're listening rather than watching. That helps us keep the algorithmic overlords of the audio world happy. Lastly, if it feels right to you, please do tell the other podcasters or aspiring podcasters in your life about the show, as that's still one of the best ways we have to reach the right people with this content. That's it for me. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.